All right, shalom, bearded hippie. So, when it comes to things, you have to keep in mind that the foundation of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments of the United States Constitution, is modeled after the Ten Commandments. So, however, historically, you had the Freemasons like George Washington, what have you, that have permeated a lot of satanic principles into Christianity, and that's been perpetuated for hundreds of years. So, you, under your misconceptions, think that modern Christians are Christians. Catholicism has never been Christianity. Protestant movement had a little bit more validity to it. However, they still didn't abide by the Ten Commandments, because ever since Emperor Constantine changed the Sabbath to Sunday, a literal day to worship the sun, that breaks two of the Ten Commandments in process: no other gods before me, as well as the weekly Sabbath. Me being a Messianic Jew, aka Orthodox Christian, which predates Catholicism, I adhere to those Ten Commandments. That's my obligation. But if you understood the concept of the Ten Commandments, you'd understand that it's very highly discriminated against in the United States of America, because, again, you're following the Gregorian calendar, the Pope's calendar, in other words, which is derivative of the Roman Julian calendar, both of which are solar calendars, which, if you're going up against the Western culture context, you have to keep in mind that is Western culture, right? Because worshiping the sun stems all the way back to Babylon, Middle Eastern, right? Especially when you're talking about Middle Eastern cultures and what have you. That's the foundation of our country, is worshiping the sun, stemming from Western culture, right? So in Babylon, Nimrod was worshipped as the sun god. Baal, his wife Semiramis, was worshipped as Ishtar, the queen of heaven, where the concept of when you die, you go to heaven comes from. And their son Tammuz being born after death, the Nimrod was worshipped as his reincarnation, becoming the new sun god Baal. Now, we live in a constitutional republic, not a democracy, but democracy is majority rule over the minority, which is the foundation of the Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution, again, to ensure that there's that separation of church and state, because the founding fathers understood the imperfections of the monarchy and wanted to assert the individual rights of the people. So our country has never been truly Christian, but that doesn't give credence to the Ashkenazi Jews, aka Orthodox Jews, nor does it give credence to the Ishmaelites, aka Muslims. Now, when it comes to the Prophet Muhammad, I saw your live recently where you're slanting up against him. I don't know much about it. You probably read the Quran more than I do. They reference Jesus, as you proclaim him to be, as a prophet. But the one main key aspect that all three of the big three, and I call them the big three, have in common is they denounce the principles that Yeshua was preaching, right? His actual name was Yeshua. Yeshua translates to Yah saves, or Yah is salvation, right? And that's the Ten Commandments, the foundation, again, of the Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution. So maybe you should read the Federalist Papers too, because they're talking about the purity of heart that was lacking in the monarchy. And it's because of that's why you have the UK and everything else that's able to be pushed and around by the Ishmaelites and way of it, because a devil can't rebuke a devil, right? So the fallacy of the arguments on the left-hand side, because they're permeating this notion of democracy and attacking anybody that's modern Christian, and the modern Christians don't have a lot of play on them, because a devil can't rebuke a devil. So modern Christians aren't actually Christians, so they don't have that credence to be able to push back against the liberal side of things. Now, it doesn't make a difference that Yeshua had darker skin tones or whatever, because it's a matter of what he was preaching. Now, me being a former member of a Black Hebrew Israelite church, it was still a matter of superficial pretenses. They're focused in on skin tone rather than the actions of the person. So when it came to me rebuking them as being devils for being disobedient to the Ten Commandments, oh, only a black man can understand the Ten Commandments. Oh, right? The liberal narrative, basically, is what it is. We're not at fault for our own actions. Everybody else is responsible for our actions, right? Like, complete lack of responsibility, which is prominently on the liberal side of things, right? They don't want to be responsible for anything. They want to just be the ones that are judging everybody in accordance. So they're basically acting like a satanic church is what it is. Now, that's why I don't necessarily am going up against you. In a way, I'm trying to strengthen you, but you don't acknowledge it because you keep deleting my comments and my videos. I like to pick at people. I'm Gen X. I come from that, and I pick at my brothers the exact same way, right? They're not in the same dynamic as I am. I'll even go up against my parents, because, again, as Yeshua put it, call no man on earth your father, for you only have one which is in heaven. And likewise, my mother, my brother, and my sister are those who do the will of my Father, which is the Ten Commandments. He went up against his own family, right? That's the principle of it. So you can't really rely on Charlie too much, nor Trump, because I can scold and correct them, well, obviously not Charlie so much, because a lot of people are under the impression, well, he died and he went to heaven, because that's Babylonian tradition, right? Watch Stargate, right? The whole movie and the TV series and everything else that they had, where they're going up against false gods and going up against the Egyptian deities and what have you, Ra and everything else, to where it was basically the Goa'uld that were in control of things. It has a Christian dynamic to it, but it also has a Sumerian slant to it, right? So you have to watch out for that, because that's where a lot of people are going wrong. But it also has a Christian slant to it too. So there's a lot of confusion ultimately in society, where, I mean, look at Superman. Look at the House of El and Elohim, right? That whole concept, Israel. However, you haven't caught up on the fact that the Israelites, the modern day Israelites, aren't actually the Israelites. That's why you go up against Candace, because Candace is going up against the state of Israel, calling them out on their hypocrisy. But I can call out Candace on being a hypocrite as well as Robert Kennedy being a family member of mine. I am a Kennedy. But even despite that, it's like, yeah, you don't want to go up against Candace, because you don't understand that Candace could be a Jew herself hereditarily. But Candace doesn't understand that context. And she's focusing on, like, she has that liberal Democrat slant, as you're indicating in your other videos and what have you. But she's on the Catholic dynamic, like Denzel Washington, like Mel Gibson, right? Same exact context. I don't hate Mel Gibson or anybody else. I love that movie that he made, right? The Passion of the Christ, right? One of my favorite movies. But at the same time, he didn't put everything into full proper context. He is right in a lot of aspects, because that's what the Jews were persecuting Yeshua for, as being disobedient to the Torah, but that was their perception of what they thought was breaking the Torah. What they were doing was they were breaking the Torah and punishing him for not breaking the Torah. He wasn't actually breaking the Torah at all. That's why he's the sacrificial lamb of Yah, right? The lamb without blemish. Now, me being the royal priesthood, which the police are modeled after, because that's what makes a Jew and a Christian, is adherence to those 10 commandments. And that's the foundation of what the police should be. They're both of office, protecting the rights of the people. That's a primary duty, is to protect the first 10 amendments of the United States Constitution, right? In each particular state, every state. So if it's not a violation of the 10 commandments, it's considered blasphemy. So I can push back on the police, I can push back on the governors, I can push back on the president, I can push back on the Supreme Court, I can push back on any and all public servants, because they have no authority over the church. I don't hate anybody, right? It's not a matter of supremacy, it's a matter of adherence to simple principles. Love thy neighbor as thyself. No murder, no theft, no coveting, no bearing false witness, and no adultery. That's love thy neighbor as thyself. And the other 5 of the 10 commandments are love Yahweh thy Elohim with all thy heart, mind, and soul, which most prominently modern Christians, nor the big 3 in general, adhere to, right? They're following the vain traditions of men, stemming all the way back to Babylon, which you can read about in Revelations, right? Revelations 21, there will be a new heaven, a new earth, and a new Jerusalem, right? Because when you die, you don't go to heaven. There's 2 resurrections in the book of Revelations. That was the whole purpose behind the resurrection of Lazarus, right? Same concept. But most people don't understand that context. So, again, I'm preaching to you, but you don't want to listen like the majority, because you think you're knowledgeable when you're not. So the same applies to a lot of the scientific rhetoric, which is Freemason dogma and propaganda of evolution theory and Big Bang theory. They can believe that as much as they want, but that's what they're utilizing to attack modern Christians, to try to act like they have this knowledge of science. Science meaning knowledge. Knowledge would imply fact, but they don't utilize actual facts. They use conjecture, which again is written about in the Federalist Papers as to what would be done when the government tries to take over, right? So I'm just trying to lift you up, versus them, they'll try to tear you down, right? So, because we're all brothers and sisters in Christ, but it's a matter of acknowledging that you have so many vanities, no different than they do. That's why they don't have any play on me being a Messianic Jew, aka Orthodox Christian, because when they call me Nazi or racist or anything else, I'll flap it right back in their face just like that. But at the same time, I have to hold everybody, even the Republican side of things, equally accountable to those 10 commandments. The same applies to all the public servants, right? That's why I win all my court cases, because they have no play on the church. Shalom.